Hello. Today I've got something a bit different. Now, while I like trains and things on rails, I also like words, and today we're going to look at something that combines both. You might have heard the expression, off your trolley. Now, I hear people saying that it's a British expression, but a couple of the sources I checked say that it's of American origin. I guess the way we'll know for certain is if anybody shows up in my comments section complaining about me using American slang. Whatever the origin, for the benefit of my international viewers, it means, broadly speaking, crazy. To be honest, I've never really thought of the origin of it much. The implication is that a person is supposed to be on their trolley, but now they aren't, and that is an indication that they have gone insane or they are being irrational. So I looked into this. Now, before I really get into it, I must admit that the prompt for me to do this was a comment saying that the term originates with trolley buses. Much as I like that explanation, I decided to look into it for myself. That is not a slight on the original commenter. It's just that, I hate to say this, but in my experience, the origin of words and phrases often tends to be rather boring. When I find a neat or cute explanation for a phrase, it tends to be, for want of a better word, wrong. Unfortunately, for those of us who make videos about history, the vast majority of history, frankly, does not make for a very good story. Well, while I was researching another video, I came across the answer, and actually the trolley bus explanation is not far off. But it originates with the predecessor to the trolley bus, the tram. Trams are often called trolleys in the US. Even if you didn't know that, you might have heard of the philosophical exercise known as the trolley problem. But the trolley also refers to the means of powering the tram. There is a pole on top of the tram which makes contact with an overhead wire. This pole has a little grooved wheel on the end which trundles along the wire, which was also known as the trolley wire. As you might imagine, a single wheel bobbing around on the end of a pole as the tram swayed and bumped along the track was a little precarious. It was very common for the trolley wheel to come right off, especially on corners. Whereupon the unfortunate driver would have to reach up with another pole and hook the wheel back on. A somewhat fiddly job, though doubtless they got used to it. And when the wheel came off, you were off the trolley, or off your trolley. The expression first shows up in the early 20th century in America, but it tended to mean more, you've lost your aim, or you're not doing what you ought to be doing. I guess a comparable expression these days would be going off the rails, a very similar metaphor. Apparently it could also mean drunk, which is no doubt why we might describe a highly intoxicated individual as trolleyed. Although a friend of mine once pointed out that you can take the name of any object, add id to the end, and it sounds like a euphemism for being drunk. Try it for yourself. Like, oh man, that guy is completely microphoned, absolutely bookcased. A complementary phrase from the same era that seems to have died out is on the trolley, used to describe someone who is smart, on trend, or similar. I seem to recall it showed up in an episode of The Simpsons. I was recently reading a memoir by a London tram driver in which he describes putting the wheel onto the wire as going on the trolley, with apparently no other connotation. I'd be interested to know when it came into use as British slang. In London, some trams were powered using a trolley pole and others were powered using a conduit between the rails, so there was a certain amount of switching between modes. Apparently the conduit was less reliable than the trolley, so ironically the conduit was more likely to send motormen off their trolley. Now, given that going off one's trolley in the literal sense used to happen on bends, I wondered if this might be the origin of the expression going round the bend, but apparently not. I've encountered several possible origins for that expression, but none of them involve trams. I've heard a couple of naval explanations. That a bend is another word for a knot and it refers to a sailor having to be restrained, or that it refers to decompression sickness, aka the bends. A non-nautical explanation has it that Victorian mental hospitals were located in secluded hidden spots and therefore were accessed via curving roads. Anyway, whichever explanation it is, it seems that it predates the electric tram, so this was a pointless digression really, wasn't it? That being said, roughly contemporary with the early American use of off-your-trolley are the terms rounding a curve and turning a corner, which were used to mean much the same thing. The blog Word Histories cites instances of commentators describing particular politicians' courses of action in those terms. Presumably, the urban reader would be very familiar with the problems of streetcar operation. On the subject of phony derivations, I've read more than one claim that off your trolley comes from a specific location, i.e., one where there was a mental hospital located next to a tram line, and therefore one would get off the trolley in order to be admitted there. But a lot of places are located next to a tram line. I mean, that's basically the whole point of a tram line, in fact. Why specifically would it become a euphemism for mental illness and not, say, going shopping, or arriving home? Given how common trams were in the 19th and 20th centuries, there are probably many hospitals located near tram lines. I can think of several in London off the top of my head. I just don't see it catching on as a turn of phrase if that's the explanation. As I say, I am very suspicious of explanations that seem a bit too cute. Returning to the original point. What I find quite interesting is that most sources seem to think it's a British expression, but the earliest uses I've been able to find have it as American. Why it should die out in one country but live on in another is a mystery to me, especially given that both the US and the UK phased their trams out at about the same time, from the 1930s through to the 1950s. All this raises another question to me. In a previous video I said that trolley buses get their name from the fact that they were basically viewed as a cross between trams and buses. That's the explanation I've read. Some early sources describe them as tram buses or trackless trolleys, which would seem to settle the matter, but now I wonder if they got that name because they too picked up current via a trolley wheel. Just a thought. These days, trams, and indeed electric trains, tend to use a pantograph, which is a much more sturdy structure that presses against the underside of the wire. So, while they don't lose power so easily, they are permanently off the trolley. Well, I do hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, I would be much obliged if you'd leave a like, and if you're not already subscribed, perhaps you'd care to subscribe for more. If you're curious, this was the comment that set me searching. I would like to thank my new friend here for the prompt. I would also, as ever, like to thank my donors on Ko-fi, on Patreon, and here on YouTube for your always generous support. You are the little wheel to my electric tram. And I shall see you all again very soon. Cheerio.